on the 7 deadly ones, I believe, is one of those that if you'll listen and if we'll put into action what we're talking about today, there's going to be an opportunity for us to experience life, and not just for us, but for people around us. If we struggle with this sin, it not only is going to affect us, but it also affects those around us. We've been looking at this scripture, John 10:10, each week. This is the reason that we're talking about this, that we're talking about sin, a subject that often that we don't want to talk about. We've had bad experiences. Someone's made us feel guilty. We feel like the only reason they told us that was to make us feel bad about ourselves. But we see here that the teaching of Jesus is very differently. When Jesus talks about this, there's this hope that comes. So if you would, read this with me aloud. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. There's this enemy of God that we believe would want nothing more than to steal our joy, our peace, that he'd want nothing more than to destroy relationships and whole communities. We see Jesus speaking here, and he says, look, if you'll come after me, if you will follow me, if you will understand who God is, then the rules, the ideas of pleasing God actually lead to this full life, this life abundantly. And it's what I believe all of us are longing for. And so 2 weeks ago, we started the series, and we're looking at these deadly sins. Now, there's not a list of the deadly sins in the Bible anywhere, so you're not going to Google it, you're not going to search, and you're not going to find this list of deadly sins. But what happened was, about 1,600 years ago, this man decides, look, I think most of our sins can kind of be summarized in about 8 sins. And then about 200 years later, Pope Gregory I said, I think we can combine some of these and we can add one. And so for about 1,400 years, people have been studying and looking at the 7 deadly sins. Not deadly in the sense of eternal death, because we know God's grace is enough for any sin, but this idea that it just doesn't bring life to us. And so we want to take a look at this. And so 2 weeks ago, we looked at the sin of sloth, and how sloth isn't just about being lazy. I'm not trying to take away your Sunday afternoon nap. I'm not trying to mess with that. Believe me, I don't want to take that away from you. But what I'm talking about when we talk about sloth is just being indifferent, of not caring. And I told you how I think that's probably one of the most dangerous of all of them, the most deadly, because as we talk about each one after that, if you just don't care, if you're indifferent, then it's really not going to matter what I say or what we're going to hear the scriptures say about it. And then last week we talked about envy. We talked about the issue of envy and how we can't resent the goodness in other people's lives and ignore the goodness in our own. If we're always looking what is happening out there, it's hard for us to focus on what God is doing here. And so today, I think, is one of the most interesting of all the sins that we're going to talk about. I'm actually going to encourage you to do this at times. Right? This is the interesting thing, is because this sin of all of them, the Bible actually tells you to do. But it's going to give very clear direction when we talk about it. I know for myself growing up and just being a boy, I love fire. There's something about fire and young boys. And so my son at 6 absolutely loves fire. And so any chance I had to be around fire or play with fire, I did. If you have young children, if you're in here, don't play with fire. Bad things happen. I was probably about 12 years old, and I was at my papa's farm in Henrietta, Oklahoma. It's on the eastern part of Oklahoma. And I had a cousin who was about the same age as me. And so we would always go out, we would just explore. He had hundreds of acres, and so we would just walk for hours. And it was around 4th of July, and we had a bunch of fireworks. And so we thought, man, this is perfect. There's no one around. We're gonna play with fireworks. And what we were doing is we were lighting these M60s, and we were throwing them. And what we realized was happening is if we could time it, there would be a small enough spark, there'd be a good enough explosion that a little bit of the grass would catch on fire. And it was awesome, right? And so we would stomp it out, and we'd get rid of the fire. We thought. So we let one go, and it begins to burn, and we stomp it out, and we begin to walk away. And then you know that sound of fire popping? We hear that, and we turn around, and it felt like within seconds, there's about a 10-yard by 10-yard area that is on fire. And as a 12-year-old boy, me and my cousin, in flip-flops, begin to stomp out this fire. To this day, I honestly have no idea. I have no idea how the fire went out. All I remember in that moment, and if you've ever been in a moment where you don't know what to do, it feels like everything's in slow motion. I just knew my whole papa's farm was gone, right? And so in that moment, fire was extremely destructive. And you've seen it. You've seen third-degree burns on people. You've seen arson. You've seen an apartment. You've seen a house go up in flames, and you see the destruction of fire. But we also know the good of fire. We know that if there's bad stuff in water, if there are bacteria in water, that if you boil it, if you use fire, it becomes clean, it becomes drinkable, it becomes good for you. We know that we need fire and we need heat to cook. And so in fire, you have both good and bad. What we're going to talk about today is the same. Today, we're going to talk about the sin of anger, the sin of wrath. And we don't have to look very far to see the sin of anger around us. If you're on social media, our world has changed because now everyone carries a camera. And so everyone records everything. And so it's very easy to see the anger acted out in our communities, in our world. It gets posted and we watch it. Whether it's fights or the way someone responds to someone at a restaurant, whatever it looks like, we see it. And we know it's all around us. We know the crime rates. We see the anger in politics. We see the anger on the road. There's just a little bit of road rage. None of you have that, I'm sure, but everyone else has road rage. We see that. Right? We see something happen in the hearts of people where they go absolutely crazy. And it comes back to the sin of anger. And so what makes you angry? What is it that makes you angry? Is it rude people? Is it arrogant people? Is it parents who say no to everything? Is it kids who question why you say no to everything? Right? What is it that stirs you up? What makes you angry? I come from a family that is known to struggle with anger. I come from a family that temper is one of those things that we joke about. Right? We see it in someone, this is what we say, well, it's just the rainbow temper. It's just the rainbow temper. I've seen it growing up. I've seen it in my life. You don't want to get on our bad side. And it's just become this thing like it's no big deal. But we know the danger of anger. We know what it leads to. We know it leads to broken relationships, broken marriages. We know it destroys relationships with our kids, the loss of a job, the loss of respect at your job. It impacts our health. I read this week, physicians are saying that our anger can be tied to heart disease, to anxiety, to depression. There's all kinds of things that if we bottle up our anger or if we let everyone know that we're angry, it can actually affect our health. We have anger management. Right? Just think about this. I thought, I don't know if we have any other management of the 7 deadly sins. Right? There's no greed management or envy management or sloth management, but there is anger management. That there are people who just feel like they don't know what to do with their anger. But we also know that anger can be a catalyst for good. And that can actually bring about the things of God. We're going to look at a scripture in Ephesians 4. If you don't own a Bible, there should be a red Bible around you. That's our gift to you. Please take that. If you bring a Bible, I'd encourage you to open that. Maybe you want to mark it up or open a smartphone. But we're going to look at Ephesians 4, 26 and 27. This is a guy named Paul. Paul, if anyone would have known what it was like to be angry, he actually was persecuting and killing Christians before he became a Christian. God gets a hold of his heart. Paul has an encounter with the risen Jesus, and everything changes for him in that moment. He begins to help other people begin to follow Jesus, and he plants churches, and then he writes these letters to these churches. And this is what he says in Ephesians 4, 26. It says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold." Now, I don't know if you know this, but the Bible is translated in a lot of different versions. This is what's called the NIV version, but in almost every other translation, almost every other way of reading the scriptures, it doesn't say, "In your anger, do not sin." It says, "Be angry." Be angry and don't sin. Be angry. So we see right here at the beginning of Paul's message that anger isn't the issue. He's telling you, be angry, but don't sin. And then he says, and I'll tell you, we'll come back in a few moments, how can we be angry and not sin? But then he has this line, do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. If you're married, maybe you've experienced this. You have an argument, you have a fight, you go to bed, you make sure your leg doesn't touch their leg, you make sure you have plenty of room divided. Paul is saying here, don't let your anger settle in on you. Don't let your anger have control over you. Verse 27, it says, and do not give the devil a foothold. Now, here's what often happens with our anger. And if you've been around this place, I've talked about this. We really respond to anger in two ways. For many of you, you are spewers. Right? Everyone knows if you're angry. If someone upsets you, you don't hold it in. You make sure people know, and you spew. It's kind of the idea of a shotgun. The blast goes off. It feels good. You've let it go, but we don't understand the destruction that's been caused. Proverbs 29:11 says, a fool gives full vent to his anger, but a wise man keeps himself under control. A fool gives full vent to his anger. And so some of you, that's how you've learned to deal with your anger, is you just spew. And then there's those of us like myself who stew, and we think that we're righteous. We think that we're better because I hold on to my anger. I don't let anyone know if I'm angry. But this is like a tea kettle. Right? And just slowly our anger begins to boil. It could be days, it could be weeks, it could be months. We hold on to it, not letting anybody know, but at some point it acts itself out. If you're a spewer, people often ask you, what's wrong? And your response is, nothing. Now, I struggle with this. I struggle with this with my wife, with friends. I'll answer nothing if oftentimes if something is wrong. And again, we often think this is the right way to deal with it. But we see here that Paul says, look, either way, we have to begin to deal with our anger, the sinful anger that we struggle with. Because if we don't, what does he say? Verse 27, and do not give the devil a foothold. This word foothold here carries a lot of meaning. It means, Paul is saying, don't give the devil opportunity. Don't invite the devil in. The foothold is this room or space or location. So be angry, but don't sin. Don't let the sun settle in. Don't let it set on your anger. And because when we do, we invite the enemy in. The enemy who wants to steal and to kill and to destroy. What you're doing is you're inviting the devil, the enemy, to take up residence in your heart, in your mind, and in your soul. Paul says, be angry and don't sin. This is this unrighteous anger. I read a quote this week that says, we become angry when we encounter a reality that we find unacceptable. Think about this. We become angry when we encounter a reality that we find unacceptable. So we become angry when we see things we don't like, or when someone does something to us that we don't appreciate or that is unacceptable. So when our food doesn't come on time, when we get our food from the drive-thru and we get home and it's wrong, right? There's this anger because we've encountered a reality that we just simply find unacceptable. I paid for it. They should have done what they were supposed to do, and we become angry. Or poor drivers, or just the unacceptable actions of someone else. This is when we become angry because something has cut in on us. Things that we don't want to happen. And so often unrighteous or deadly anger comes when we lose something. When you lose power, when you lose your time, when you lose money, when your pride is attacked, and we lose a little bit of our pride or our self-esteem or whatever it might be, we become angry. I've just learned, I think God is really funny at times. And I'm realizing now that my temper, I've got a pretty good hold on it, thanks to God. But I'm learning that my pets, right? I talk about my pets way too much. And my dog, 13 granola bars the other night, and that's just normal. That's just an evening snack, is eating whatever he can find, however much he wants. But as I shared a couple weeks ago, about a month, my daughter sold her fish and bought a leopard gecko. And I told the story of this little leopard gecko screaming at my daughter. And so things have been great with this leopard gecko until yesterday. And my daughter screams hysterically, "He's gone!" Yes, oh. And so I'm in there, I'm like, whoa, what do you mean he's gone? I lifted up the log, and Hamilton is what she named him. Hamilton is gone. Well, how can he be gone? And immediately, right, well, did you not put him back in the cage? Did you not put the lid on? Yeah, I did what I was supposed to do. Well, you couldn't have done what you were supposed to do, or Hamilton would be there, right? So I began to look in windows, and I began to move stuff. Well, a few days ago, about a week ago, someone, not named my wife, decides to put a seashell, in the cage. And I saw it and didn't think anything about it. It was great. He could play with it, I guess. I don't know what a gecko does. And then I had this thought, I wonder if he's in the shell. So I lift up the shell, and I can barely see Hamilton's head. And so then my daughter goes berserk that he is stuck, that he is dead, right? And so there's just this anger. And the reason is I had plans. I had other things that were more important than this gecko, right? I had way more important things to deal with. My pride, because I didn't take it out. Right? It's easy to blame other people for wrong, but honestly, I saw it in there, and so then I start having these regrets, and then he won't come out, and so then I get the tools out, and I'm ready to hammer the shell, and I'm like, let's wait, right? Let's wait, let's get food, we get food, he doesn't come out, I'm ready again, and I say, let's leave, right? But leave before my anger results in something, and I'm happy to say that Hamilton is alive and well and came out of the shell. But it's just interesting, in that moment, or with my dog, why do I get angry? What's behind it? Where have I felt attacked? Where am I losing something? Tim Keller, who's a pastor up in New York, and I've tried to communicate this well as best I can. He talks about a lot of the issues in our life come when we have a disordered love. Right? The Bible's very clear. A person comes to Jesus and says, what are the most important commandments? What are the things that I need to do? And the response is to love God and to love people. And Tim Keller says the problem comes when those things get out of order. When we begin to love our job more than we love our family, and we love our family more than we love our God, there's problems that come. And so Tim Keller says what has to happen is we have to reorder our love. And the way we do that is we make God the supreme love of our lives. And then if you think about this, the level of our anger usually coincides with the level of our love for things. Just think about it. How much do you love yourself? Not in the love your neighbor as you love yourself, but in a selfish kind of way. When someone does cut us off, and do they know what they just did? Do they think they're better than me? Right? We love certain things, and when we love certain things, our anger comes. So an out-of-order love leads to an out-of-order anger. We have to reorder our love. And so Paul says, be angry, don't sin. Be angry, but don't stay angry. Be angry, but don't make room for the devil. Be angry, but don't be angry at the things that don't matter. See, sinful anger is an anger that concerns only ourselves and what we believe is right for us, without really concerning ourselves what is right for other people. So now we're going to look at this righteous anger. So this deadly anger is an anger that we fail to control. It is an anger about things that just don't really matter. And it acts itself out either verbally or physically, and it does damage to not only ourselves, but the people around us. Now, how do we have a righteous anger? If Paul's going to say be angry, then how do we do that without sinning? And then I don't know if you know this, but Jesus often got angry. I think this is overlooked at times. I mean, Jesus was such a loving man, and he did all kinds of things for all kinds of people, but then there were these times where he was angry. So let's look at those just real quick, two of them. Mark 3, verse 1 says this. Another time he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." All right, hit pause just for a second. As it was often the case, the religious leaders didn't like Jesus. So anytime they could, they were trying to set him up. Now, what is Jesus going to do here where he could condemn himself when he does something wrong? So they were trying to set Jesus up often. And in this moment, there is a person made and created in the image of God, standing in front of religious leaders with a shriveled hand. And all these people care about is, what is Jesus going to do? All they care about is following the religious rules. Well, it's the Sabbath. We can't work on the Sabbath. It would take energy to show compassion or empathy or to help this man. We're not going to do that. What's Jesus going to do? Verse 4, then Jesus asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they remained silent. And so I think their silence is deafening to Jesus in this moment, and I'm sure it's deafening to the man who's standing there with the shriveled hand. That these religious leaders had chosen rules and regulations over people. That they're failing to show any empathy, that they've failed to understand that rules and regulations are meant to bring life, not legalism and dead religion. Verse 5, he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Then the Pharisees went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Man, just hear the heart of Jesus in this moment. That the religious leaders standing before a man created in the image of God cared less for him. They showed no desire. Their hearts were stubborn. Their hearts were calloused, and they didn't care about the need of their neighbor. I think that's why Jesus is angry. That they failed to love their neighbor. He's angry because they've mistaken following God with following rules. And see, what we know is Jesus never sinned. But yet we see that he's angry. And that he responds. And then he does something in his anger, yet it is a righteous anger because he has not lost control. It is not about himself, but it is about this man. Be angry, but don't sin. Now, one of the most familiar stories we know about Jesus' anger is actually found in every gospel. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, these are the accounts of Jesus' life. They all kind of have different stories. They're written in different ways because they're written by real people who have their real life circumstances. And so this story is found in all four. We're going to look at John 2 real quick. Verse 12. It says, after this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, where they stayed for a few days. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts, he found men selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple area, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. To those who sold doves, he said, get out of here. Get these out of here. How dare you turn my Father's house into a marketplace? Now, we don't often see Jesus in this light. To say Jesus is upset is an understatement. He is angry. But why? I mean, was it because it feels like a marketplace? Like if a church was to sell something, is that what Jesus had a problem with? It's not. So what's going on here? See, people had traveled miles and miles to come and spend Passover there. And they were remembering how Jesus had rescued their people. And so they would come and they would make these sacrifices. All people, all kinds of people, all walks of people from all different places. And they would make their way there. Well, many of them were poor. But because they needed to have something to sacrifice, there were these other people who took advantage of it. And they knew they needed it. And so instead of loving their neighbor, instead of helping them, they took advantage. They probably would have charged more than they needed to because these people needed to have it. And so in this moment, Jesus enters into the scene, this time that's supposed to be of celebration, and he observes what's happening. And in this moment, the people there are not loving their neighbors. They could care less about their neighbors and the needs that they have. They were taking advantage of the poor. And so they're just perpetuating the injustice. And Jesus was not only speaking truth to power, he was demonstrating it powerfully. He didn't just say what was wrong. He showed them what they needed to do, and that was to get out. And so here's what had happened. If you read in other parts of the scriptures, there's this idea, this wall of hostility. And in that day, there were only certain places that certain people could go to worship. And so there were these literal walls. And there would be these signs warning people not to go past. And so only a certain group of people, specifically men and from a certain culture, could go into really the Holy of Holies. And everyone else was left on the outside. And that's also what's happening. And so Jesus comes in and says, no more. No more. And so Jesus is angry because it was a direct attack at people. It was an injustice, and Jesus wouldn't and couldn't allow it. And so, listen to me. We, the church, must stand up and begin to have some righteous anger about the things that anger the heart of God. We must become angry when people are treated as if they are not made in the image of God. That all people have the thumbprint of God on them. Not just those who recognize it, not just those who follow Jesus, but everyone. Everyone is created in the image of God. And so our anger must begin to stir when we see the injustices around us, when we see wrong happening. See, righteous anger, unlike deadly anger, really isn't about us. It's not about us. It's about recognizing when our neighbors, those we care for or should care for, are mistreated, when they're voiceless, when there's injustice. Sometimes this is systems, maybe the government. Sometimes this is systems, even religious. Sometimes this is unfair environments that have been created. We see it. We know it. But yet we turn away from it. And so we see the deadly anger around us. However, I think I also see this vacuum of this righteous anger as well. And so what happens is we become inoculated. Do you know what that means? Like we've had just enough happen. So if you get a vaccine, they give you just enough of the vaccine so that you really don't get sick. And so I think we've become inoculated to the injustice around us. We've seen it, we've experienced it, we look past it. Yeah, we know it's happening, but what can we really do about it? And so we become callous, and like the people in the first story, we become stubborn or hard-hearted towards it. I mean, let's be honest. We tend to get angrier at the inconveniences in our lives more than we do about the serious injustices around us. I mean, if you just think about the last time you really got angry, what was it about? Was it about something that really mattered? Was it about something that angered the heart of God? Was it about you? Was it about you and what has happened to those things you want to control? So we must begin to reorder our love, and we must love God first and love people second. We must begin to be good neighbors. We must take what we say in here, what we sing in here, and put it into practice in our daily lives. It's not a program. So we don't just necessarily create a program about justice. We, as followers of Jesus, live lives that say that that's not right, that that's not just. And so be angry. Now, this is hard at times. I just quickly want to share this. My daughter this week, we're having dinner, and she begins to share how there's some kids in her class who are being bullied. And she says there's a couple who get upset, they're always made fun of. And then my daughter begins to kind of cry. And my allergies kick in immediately, and I've been to get a little teary-eyed with her, and what's wrong? She said, well, I stand up for them. I stand up for them, and I tell them, it's not okay. It's not right. And she says, they usually then just kind of turn on me. And man, my little 11-year-old girl, broken in that moment, was standing up for what was right, even when it's hard. That things were not okay. That her friends, who she sees as created in the image of God already, that no one deserves that. She wasn't just going to stand by. I hope I hope she doesn't get inoculated. I hope that she doesn't become hard-hearted, that she doesn't become callous and not care anymore as she gets older, because for many of us, we've just seen it long enough that we do nothing. And so let me challenge you, speak up. If my 11-year-old daughter can do it, we can do it. That we speak up for the things that aren't right, that we choose to love people over rules and regulations, that we let our anger stay under control, and we fight for what's right for the people around us. But we put this into action. I saw a commercial this week that, man, it hit me hard, because in our world right now, it's very easy to see the needs, to click a like or to talk about it, but it takes something. It takes our time, our energy to do what is right. Watch this commercial.